It was a Prescott family tradition. Before marrying, the heir had to draw a marriage fortune. Audrey had drawn a good fortune every single time, which is why, after 5 years of being engaged, he still couldn't marry her. This year was her 6th time drawing. He overheard her conversation with the butler. "Miss Prescott, you've drawn a good fortune again." Audrey replied coolly, "Just like before. Swap it for a bad one. Tim just got back in the country, and he's never liked the idea of Gavin being his brother-in-law. Gavin is very understanding. He'll be fine waiting another year." He got it. She still didn't want to marry him. Thank God for the final clause in the Prescott family tradition. If a good fortune isn't drawn after 6 tries, the engagement can be voided. He could finally go find the one that got away. A woman's soft, warm scent wrapped around his neck. It was mixed with the sharp, bold smell of cologne. A man's cologne. He had just opened his eyes when a flurry of soft kisses landed on him. Just as the mood was reaching its peak, he suddenly spoke. "What kind of fortune did you draw this time?" Her movements froze. She shot up from the bed, the passion in her eyes instantly gone. The mood was ruined. He was looking at a face as beautiful as any A-list celebrity's. But right now it was unnaturally stiff. After a long pause, he finally heard her answer. "I drew a bad one." He fell silent. He lowered his gaze to the pattern on the bedsheets, feeling no surprise at all. He had known the answer 2 hours ago. While looking for the orange cat, he'd passed by the Prescott family's ancestral hall. He heard her talking with the butler inside. "Miss Prescott, you've drawn a good fortune again." Audrey paused for a moment, then replied indifferently. "Same as always. Swap it for a bad one." The butler sighed heavily. "You and Mr. Vance have been engaged for 5 years. Are you going to make him wait even longer?" Audrey hesitated before speaking. "Just a little longer. Tim just got back, and he's never liked the idea of Gavin being his brother-in-law." "Miss Prescott, you're the one getting married. You can't keep making Mr. Vance suffer for the young master's sake." The butler couldn't help but raise his voice. Audrey rubbed her temples. Her tone was cold. "Another year will be fine. Gavin does what he's told. He'll understand, and he'll be willing to wait." The butler wanted to say more, but the orange cat in his arms suddenly let out a meow of discontent. By the time Audrey ran out, he was already gone, and he knew one thing for sure. She still didn't want to marry him this year, which was why she wanted to switch the fortune again. Seeing his silence now, she sighed. She hugged him, a hint of guilt in her embrace. Just then, her phone rang. He saw the screen light up. The contact name, Tim. She quickly let go of him and walked out to the balcony to take the call. Her voice dropped, becoming surprisingly gentle. He vaguely heard the word gala. When she finished the call and faced him again, her voice was a little strained. "Gavin, get out the heart of eternity watch." He lay there without moving, asking curiously, "What do you need that watch for?" Audrey's gaze drifted out the window, avoiding his. "My dad is attending a gala tonight. Just let him borrow it for a few days." His future father-in-law wanted to borrow a watch he had no reason to refuse. But he had his doubts. Why would his father-in-law need a watch? But the call came from Tim. Late that night, Audrey still hadn't come home. Unable to sleep, he scrolled through his social media feed. His finger froze when he got to Tim's post. In the picture, Tim was wearing a custom-tailored suit. But that was the suit Audrey had commissioned for him 2 weeks ago. She'd said it was his birthday present. And on his wrist, he was clearly wearing Gavin's Heart of Eternity watch. The sparkle of the diamonds seemed to pierce his eyes through the screen. In that moment, he knew Audrey had lied to him. His father-in-law hadn't borrowed the watch at all. Tim had taken it. In the photo, Tim had his arm wrapped intimately around Audrey. His head was tilted slightly toward hers. They looked as close as a couple in love. The caption was even more blatant and cutting. "My sister's gift. It looks best on me after all." He stared at the photo, his fingers unconsciously tightening around his phone. Tim was really back in the country. No wonder Audrey smelled of that cologne he always wore. Then again, the watch wasn't really his to begin with. It was a Prescott family heirloom. Only the son-in-law of the Prescott family was worthy of wearing it. Audrey had put it on his wrist herself on the day of their engagement. She had thoughtfully told him its significance. He was about to take a screenshot to confront her when a text from Audrey suddenly popped up. Just one short sentence. "Working late, not coming home tonight." He immediately called her. But a cold, automated voice came through the receiver. "The number you have dialed has been turned off." He had no idea how he made it through the night. Was Audrey really working late? Or was she with Tim? Just as dawn broke, his best friend, Mark, called. His voice was full of shock. "Gavin, I saw Tim at the hotel last night. Didn't the Prescott say he had to stay abroad for 10 years before he could come back?" 4 years ago, the Prescott family had indeed promised that Tim would stay abroad for 10 years. It was because he and Tim just couldn't get along. During his senior year of high school, shortly after the engagement, he'd earned a guaranteed spot at Harvard. The very next day, Audrey came to see him. They stood under the big banyan tree on campus, a gentle breeze blowing. But her request was anything but gentle. "Gavin, Tim wants that spot. Give it to him. He needs it more." The best Tim had ever done in school was rank outside the top 100. He definitely needed the guaranteed admission more. Otherwise, he'd never get into a top university, let alone become Audrey's schoolmate. Even though Audrey was beautiful and his fiancée, he refused. He was someone who cared deeply about his future and wouldn't be swayed by beauty, even if the person in question was his future brother-in-law. After being rejected, Audrey left with a dark expression on her face. Then, after the college entrance exams, came the first drawing of the marriage fortune. She told him she had drawn a bad one. According to Prescott family tradition, without a good fortune, even though they were engaged, she couldn't marry him yet. She asked him to wait a year until she could draw again. If she drew a good one, they would get married. The next year, the day before the drawing, Tim, who was attending community college, cornered him with 2 of his buddies. "Gavin Vance, my sister doesn't like you at all. She's only engaged to you to repay a debt. Even if she draws a good fortune tomorrow, she won't marry you. You should just break up with her." He was right about the first part. His mother had died saving Audrey, crushed under a car from which she never woke up. The Prescotts owed his family a life debt. So, not long after the funeral, Audrey's parents came to their house and proposed a marriage alliance. At the time, he also thought the Prescotts were just repaying a debt. But Audrey told him she genuinely liked him. It wasn't just about repaying the debt. She wanted to take his mother's place and protect him for the rest of his life. She promised to be a good wife and give him a warm, complete home. The Vance family business had gone bankrupt then, leaving them with massive debts. Looking at his grandmother in her hospital bed, her eyes full of hope, he had no choice but to agree to the engagement. After that, he got into a fight with Tim and his friends. He ended up with a broken leg and spent a month in the hospital. Tim's face got messed up in the fight, and Audrey sent him abroad for treatment that very night. Soon after, the Prescott family made a promise. They wouldn't let Tim come back for 10 years, and they certainly wouldn't let him bully Gavin again. But now, only 4 years had passed, and Audrey had let him return. She even secretly gave him the watch that only the Prescott son-in-law was meant to wear. At that moment, he was deeply disappointed in her. Audrey didn't get home until the afternoon. He could smell the cologne on her again, even stronger this time. And Tim was with her. He was still wearing the watch on his wrist, as if showing it off. But when Tim saw him in his pajamas, his expression changed, as if a thought had just occurred to him. He immediately started yelling, "Gavin Vance, what gives you the right to live in the Prescott house?" He raised his fist. Just as it was about to land on Gavin's face, Gavin grabbed his wrist and pushed him away forcefully. "I'm Audrey's fiancé. Why shouldn't I live here?" Tim staggered back a few steps, his eyes turning red. He complained to Audrey, playing the victim. "Sis, he hasn't even married you yet. How can he live here? It'll ruin your reputation. You have to kick him out." Audrey's expression was complicated. She didn't agree right away. 3 years ago, on the day his grandmother moved into a nursing home, he was left all alone. Worried, Audrey had driven to his place in the middle of the night to pick him up. She told him that from then on, the Prescott house was his home, and no one could ever kick him out. Her concern had been so genuine back then. He had believed her, which was why he'd agreed to move in. Seeing that she hadn't agreed to kick him out, Tim bit his lip, his eyes instantly welling up. He cried out, sounding deeply wronged. "Sis, I don't want him living here. If he doesn't move out, I'll go live somewhere else." Audrey quickly grabbed his hand. Her voice was laced with panic. "No, you just got back. You don't know your way around. I can't let you live outside by yourself." She then turned to Gavin. There was a hint of apology in her eyes. "Gavin, Tim has been staying in a hotel for the past 2 days. I want him to move back in. Could you just give him some space and move out for a little while? Please? Give him space?" That phrase again. Maybe because he had been disappointed by Audrey too many times, he wasn't even angry anymore. This time, he actually agreed to give in to her. "Fine, I'll move out today." A wave of relief washed over Audrey's face. It was immediately followed by a pang of guilt. "You don't have to be in such a hurry. Tomorrow is fine," she said quietly. Then she shot Tim a disapproving glare. Tim, however, just grinned, celebrating his victory. While Audrey turned to answer her phone, he rubbed the watch on his wrist, the watch that should have been Gavin's. He couldn't resist a few taunts. "So what if you're my sister's fiancé? She still gave me the watch I wanted. And when she tells you to get out of the house, you have to leave with your tail between your legs. I heard she drew a bad fortune again yesterday. Looks like you'll have to keep waiting. Maybe you'll wait until you're an old bachelor, and my sister still won't have drawn a good fortune to marry you." Gavin looked up, his tone calm but his words sharp. "At least I got to be her fiancé. Some people will probably never have that title in their entire lives." Tim froze for a second, instantly understanding the jab. His face flushed with anger. He shot Gavin a vicious glare and stormed off. He knew better than anyone that he wasn't Audrey's real brother. The true Prescott heir had disappeared at the age of 8. He was just a replacement the family had found. No matter how obvious his feelings for Audrey were, for a prominent family, reputation and image were everything. Audrey's parents would never allow them to cross that line. For the rest of his life, he could only be Audrey's brother. A stand-in, hidden in the shadows. The butler came over and asked if he needed help packing. He refused. He had arrived with just one suitcase, and he would leave with just one. The custom suits and accessories that should have been his had long been sold off, the money sitting safely in his bank account. The butler couldn't help but feel indignant for him. "Mr. Vance, why don't you tell Miss Prescott that the family's marriage fortunes can only be drawn 6 times? He knew about the final clause in the Prescott family tradition too. If a good fortune isn't drawn after 6 tries, the engagement can be voided. He shook his head, his eyes filled with nothing but acceptance. "There's no need. If she really wanted to marry me, she wouldn't have made me wait this long. 5 years. Switching the fortunes again and again. Did she really think he didn't know? It was just her way of lying to herself." As he went downstairs, he saw Tim clinging to Audrey, his voice affectionate. "Sis, I want to join the company, and I want Gavin's position as project manager." This concerned the business, so Audrey wasn't so foolish this time. She frowned and refused. "No, you studied art. What do you know about managing projects?" He didn't stick around to hear the rest. He left the Prescott house. The next day, after closing a deal with a client, he returned to the office. Everything from his office had been moved to a cubicle by the door. He suppressed his anger and demanded, "Who did this?" The HR manager, Mr. Harris, rushed out, terrified. Gavin. An hour ago, Mr. Tim was appointed the new project manager. You're his assistant now." So he had been demoted, and he had to be Tim's assistant. Furious, he stormed up to the CEO's office on the top floor. Audrey's assistant tried to block his way. "Mr. Vance, the president is in an important video conference. She can't see you right now." He pushed the assistant aside and threw the door open. Audrey wasn't in any video conference. On her desk lay a glossy photo book of Tim's recent modeling work. One page showed him looking rebellious, the next looking sunny, all showcasing his toned physique. Hearing the commotion, she didn't even look up, just snapped irritably, "Get out!" He met her gaze and demanded, "Why did you demote me? In the 3 years I've been here, what have I done wrong?" He had started at Prescott Industries his junior year of college. He worked his way up from the bottom, becoming project manager in just 1 year. He led his team to land several major deals that everyone in the industry thought were impossible, delivering real results. He even developed stomach problems from working too hard. Audrey knew all of this better than anyone. A flash of guilt crossed her face, and her voice softened. "Just let Tim have this one, okay? He's still young and just wants to have some fun. Once he gets bored, he'll give the position back to you." He almost laughed out of sheer anger. His fingertips dug deep into his palm. "Audrey, have you counted how many times you've asked me to just let him have it over the past 3 years? Why should I always have to be the one to give in to him?" Just then, Tim emerged from the private lounge inside the office. He was wearing a silk bathrobe, the collar open. His expression was triumphant. "Because I'm her brother. It's not my fault you weren't born with a loving older sister." He was an only child, he certainly didn't have a sister. But a sister like Audrey? He wouldn't want one anyway. Seeing his frustration, Tim made a suggestion. "If you can land that new project on the east side, I'll let you be project manager again." Everyone in their circle knew the east side property belonged to Miss Sterling. The woman had been divorced 3 times and was notoriously ruthless and difficult at the negotiating table. She was also known for her inappropriate and aggressive behavior towards her male business partners. Rumors of her misconduct were common. This project was a hot potato. For 3 months, few companies had dared to touch it. Before Tim returned, Audrey had also been against him taking on this project. But upon hearing Tim's proposal, she fell silent, offering no objection. Tim added a helpful reminder. "Don't work too hard trying to close this deal. You wouldn't want to get yourself used up and thrown away. My sister is a bit of a germaphobe, you know." Gavin paused for a second, then shot back sarcastically. "I'm a germaphobe too, probably even more than she is." Audrey's face instantly darkened. For the past 2 days, he had been actively avoiding her touch. And in just a few seconds, he made his decision. "Fine, I'll take the assignment. But I need President Prescott to sign these agreements we finalized this morning." Tim and Audrey exchanged a look. Tim, in particular, had a triumphant smile. "See, sis? I told you Gavin would take it. A top Harvard grad wouldn't back down from a challenge like this. You lost the bet. You have to take me shopping this afternoon." He didn't want to stay a moment longer. He took the folder out of his bag. He deliberately placed it on top of Tim's photo book. The photo book made for a perfect signing pad. Audrey froze for a moment. She awkwardly picked up a pen and started flipping through the pages, signing them quickly. The sound of the pen scratching across the paper was rushed and sloppy. She didn't even bother to read the terms of the agreements. She certainly didn't notice that tucked inside the contracts was his resignation letter. According to company policy, employees had to give 30 days notice. But with the president's special approval, the entire process could be completed in a week. For the next few days, he didn't go to the office. His personal belongings, which had been piled up at the cubicle, had been cleared out the day he accepted the assignment. All that remained was a clean desk, as if no one had ever been there. 5 days later, he was woken up by a barrage of notifications on his phone. He clicked on the trending topics. Sterling family limo picks up mystery man. Miss Sterling's 4th husband rumored to be revealed. The second headline was #1 on the trending list. The accompanying photo showed a black Maybach parked in front of his house. The window was half down, vaguely revealing a man and woman embracing in the back seat. The woman's face was unclear, but the profile of the man caught by the camera bore a strong resemblance to him. The comment section had already exploded. Someone had dug up Miss Sterling's identity. Diane Sterling, 59 years old, a billionaire and the chairwoman of the Sterling Group. Someone else posted a photo of him with Audrey. They speculated that since he'd failed to marry into a rich family, He had pivoted to the embrace of a wealthy older woman, ready to become a stepfather. He wasn't worried, nor did he offer any explanation. But Audrey suddenly called, demanding an answer. "Gavin Vance, I sent you to close a deal, not to fool around. Don't forget you are still my fiancé." He found it amusing. "Weren't you the ones who told me to approach Miss Sterling? How am I supposed to land the project if I don't have dinner with her? If I give up on this project, will you let me go back to being project manager?" Audrey fell silent. He could faintly hear Tim's voice in the background. "Sis, if you make Gavin project manager again, I'm leaving the country and never coming back." Audrey said nothing more. Every time Tim threatened her, she caved. This time was no exception. That evening, Tim sent him a picture. It was an invitation to a Chamber of Commerce event that night. Below it were a few lines of text. "There are only 2 invitations. My sister gave one to me. I'll be her date. Looks like she doesn't like you that much after all. So what if you've been by her side for 5 years? You can't even get an invitation. The person she really loves is me. I suggest you cancel the engagement and leave before things get ugly." The taunting tone was palpable even through the screen. He simply dialed a familiar number. "Miss Sterling, I'll be there on time for the gala tonight." When he walked into the banquet hall wearing a velvet, burgundy suit with Diane Sterling on his arm, they instantly became the center of attention. Audrey's face showed clear surprise, followed by a flash of admiration in her eyes. It had been a long time since he had dressed up like this. Her date, as expected, was Tim. Throughout the evening, many people were whispering about his relationship with Diane Sterling. Some even said they were close to announcing a wedding date. Others countered that he was still Audrey's fiancé, so how could he marry an old woman? All the major players from the business and tech worlds were there that night. He offered no explanation, becoming the topic of conversation once again. But he also met a lot of new people. And with Diane Sterling's help, he managed to secure several private projects on the side. When he stepped out onto the balcony alone for some air, Audrey quickly followed. "Gavin Vance, how could you be Diane Sterling's date? Don't you know how old she is?" He looked at her, amused. "Well, my fiancé brought someone else as her date. I was free, so I thought I'd help Miss Sterling out. It helps with the project, so what's wrong with that?" Audrey rushed to explain. "Tim just got back. I was just showing him around, letting him meet people." He scoffed. "He's been abroad for 4 years. You think he hasn't met people? Besides, every year on his birthday you fly out of the country to travel with him." He had known this secret for a long time. He and Tim shared the same birthday. For 5 years, she had never once celebrated with him. The first year, she made an excuse about needing to fly abroad to sign an urgent contract. But then he saw Tim's social media post. The 2 of them were skiing in Switzerland. The second year, he thought she would celebrate with him, so he cooked a whole table of food. But her assistant told him she had already left the country the day before. Tim's feed was updated that night too. Audrey had taken him to an important gala overseas. By his 3rd birthday, he didn't wait for her or even remind her. After hearing this, Audrey looked guilty and couldn't meet his eyes. She could only say helplessly, "Gavin, I'm sorry. Next time, I promise you'll be my date to the gala." He shook his head, his tone indifferent. There won't be a next time. She wouldn't get the chance to invite him, and he no longer cared. Diane Sterling's assistant was walking over quickly. She reminded him that the party was ending soon. He turned and walked back to Diane's side. Audrey opened her mouth, but the words to ask him to come back wouldn't come out. She was afraid Tim would throw another tantrum. As they were leaving, a reporter stopped Diane Sterling. The reporter asked with a smile, "Miss Sterling, there are rumors that the Sterling family will be celebrating a happy occasion soon. Is that true?" Diane turned and looked at him. She smiled for the camera and announced loudly, "That's right. I'd like to take this opportunity to share some good news. Mr. Vance will soon be marrying into our Sterling family." As the words fell, he glanced back and saw Audrey. She was standing behind them somewhere. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with shock and disbelief, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. Tim came over to pull her away. "Sis, I don't feel well. Can you take me home now? This time, Audrey shook him off. She turned to Gavin and demanded angrily, Gavin Vance, what is going on? He looked at her, completely calm. His voice was even. You heard correctly. I'm marrying into the Sterling family soon. Audrey frowned. Gavin, I know the East Side project is important, but you shouldn't joke about something like marriage. Even now, she didn't believe him. He smirked, but there was no humor in his eyes. I'm not joking. Have you forgotten that our engagement was called off a long time ago? Audrey immediately retorted. Her voice was urgent. Called off? When? How come I don't know about this? Gavin, just wait for me for one more year. I promise I'll draw a good fortune next year, and we'll have a grand wedding. Hearing this, he let out a cynical laugh. You've said that 5 times already. I'm tired of hearing it and tired of waiting. I'm not waiting anymore. Just yesterday, he had visited his grandmother. He told her about calling off the engagement. His grandmother didn't approve. She said he had already waited 5 years, so what was one more? The Prescotts had been good to them. But he argued back. His mother had died saving Audrey. The Prescotts owed his family. How could he sacrifice his own happiness for that? What a raw deal that would be. Audrey couldn't bear the weight of that kind of debt anyway. Besides, she wasn't in love with him. He refused to be a substitute. Realizing he wasn't joking, Audrey's tone turned mocking. Gavin Vance, this engagement is not something you can just cancel on your own. He feigned surprise. The last rule in your family's tradition states that if a good fortune isn't drawn after 6 tries, the engagement can be voided. You didn't know? Audrey's face went white. She fumbled for her phone, frantically calling the butler to ask. The answer was exactly what he'd said. She lunged at him, trying to grab his wrist. Gavin, I honestly didn't know about that rule. He stepped back, avoiding her touch. 6 drawings. 5 of them were good fortunes, and you changed every single one to a bad one. If you didn't want to marry me, you could have just said so. You didn't have to keep changing the fortunes and stringing me along. And you certainly didn't have to use me as a stand-in for Tim, wasting 5 years of my life. Audrey froze. She hadn't expected him to know about her switching the fortunes, or that he knew she was in love with Tim. She wanted to explain, but she didn't know how. In the end, all she could say was, Gavin, I really do want to marry you. He shook his head, his eyes empty of emotion. He would never believe her words again. You've used up all 6 of your chances, and you've already taken back the engagement watch. Our engagement is over. Who I marry from now on has nothing to do with you. But she still refused to believe it, even concocting a clever excuse. Gavin, is it because you haven't landed the East Side project yet? It's okay. I don't want the project anymore. You can come back to work tomorrow, back to your position as project manager. Okay? The moment she finished speaking, Tim started pulling at her arm, throwing a fit. No, sis, I won't let him come back. If you agree, I'll leave the country and never return. Audrey's assertiveness vanished instantly. She turned and started cooing at Tim, trying to calm him down. He couldn't be bothered to watch their drama anymore. He turned and got into the Sterling family's limo, which had been waiting for him. For 2 days straight, he didn't show up at the office. On the 3rd day, Audrey couldn't help but go look for him. But his office was empty. There was nothing there. She rushed to ask the HR manager. President Prescott, Gavin submitted his resignation 7 days ago. The paperwork was just finalized yesterday. Audrey stood there, stunned. Took her a long time to process it. Impossible. Who approved his resignation? The HR manager was prepared. He handed her Gavin's resignation form. There, clear as day, was her own signature, dated exactly 7 days prior. Her eyes remained fixed on the paper. Took her a long while to remember what had happened. 7 days ago, she had appointed Tim as project manager. Gavin had stormed into her office and later handed her several agreements to sign. She hadn't looked closely at the time, she'd just signed them all. Realizing this, she stormed over to his house. Gavin Vance, how dare you trick me and resign behind my back? He wasn't surprised to see her. That's right. I'm done working for a brainless boss. Audrey hadn't expected him to be so blunt. You're making all this fuss just because I let Tim take your spot as project manager? He shook his head calmly. No. Audrey had no choice but to drop her pride and try to persuade him. All right, you've thrown your tantrum, you've had your fun. Come back to work tomorrow as project manager. I'll make Tim my assistant. But he no longer needed such arrangements. You think I'm throwing a tantrum? That's hilarious. My wedding date is set. You're welcome to attend the ceremony in a week. Audrey's patience wore thin, her voice dripping with disdain. Cut it out, Gavin. This joke isn't funny. Do you really think I'd believe you're marrying that old woman, Diane Sterling? He didn't waste his breath arguing. He just threw out, believe what you want. With that, he left her standing there. The Sterling family's driver had been waiting outside for a while. The wedding in a week was real. He was on his way to a suit fitting. 3 days later, he was trending on social media again. Vance Industries and Sterling Group announce major merger. Vance Industries officially goes public. When Audrey saw the news, he and Diane Sterling were signing their names on a contract. The new project she had been so determined to win now belonged entirely to Vance Industries. Her phone rang again. The caller ID was Audrey. When he answered, her voice was full of shock and confusion. There was even an undercurrent of panic. Gavin Vance, what the hell is going on? He replied with a laugh. I suddenly realized that working for myself is much better than working for someone else. At least I won't be inexplicably demoted. 5 years ago, Vance Industries went bankrupt, and he was forced to agree to the marriage alliance. He had been working tirelessly to pay off the debts ever since. But he never had the heart to sell the Vance family's factories. His old employees had stuck with him through the toughest times. They were the foundation for rebuilding his family's legacy. After joining Prescott Industries, he used the company's resources and connections to secretly prop up his own business. Audrey never knew about any of it. She always thought his family was broke, that he and his grandmother could only survive because of her. She looked down on him, which is why she never took their engagement seriously. She kept changing the fortunes, refusing to marry him. Landing this major project with the Sterling Group was the perfect launch for Vance Industries' IPO. It was only then that Audrey understood. So you quit not because you were demoted, but because you were going back to your own company. And you were negotiating the East Side project for your own company. In that moment, it all clicked. The project she had sent him to secure had been snatched up right under her nose. Worse, his company operated in the same sector as Prescott Industries. Now, they were competitors. He didn't want to be entangled with her anymore. Audrey, let's just part ways amicably. But Audrey grew agitated. No, I don't object to you wanting to be a boss and going back to your own company, but I do not agree to you ending our engagement. He immediately hit her with a blow. I'm getting married in 3 days. To a Sterling. Audrey again refused to believe him. Gavin, stop threatening me. You wouldn't marry an old woman just for a project. I know you want to end the engagement because Tim is back, but he really is just my brother. The person I love now is you. He laughed. Whatever happens between you and your brother from now on has nothing to do with me. Audrey spat out in anger. I'd like to see if you actually marry into the Sterling family in 3 days. Who would give up a young, beautiful fiancée for a woman who's almost 60? Gavin Vance. I'll be waiting for you to come crying back to me, begging to get back together. But not long after, a gold-embossed wedding invitation was delivered to Audrey. Her fingers tightened around the card. The bride's name on it wasn't Diane Sterling. It was Claire Sterling. The media had already gone wild. Reports of the marriage alliance were everywhere. Everyone was stunned that Diane Sterling had a daughter. Audrey felt like she had been struck by lightning. She had been so certain he was just bluffing about marrying a Sterling to scare her. She never imagined he was actually getting married. And the person he was marrying was not the old woman she'd pictured. Soon, Claire Sterling's background was completely exposed. She was Diane Sterling's daughter from her first marriage and her only child. After her parents divorced, she moved to the countryside with her father. No one knew that when he was 7 because his mother was busy with the company. He had been sent to live with his grandfather in the countryside. There, he and Claire had spent 3 full years of their childhood together. He met her again in high school. She was 2 years ahead of him. They had promised to go to the same university. But during his senior year, his family fell on hard times. His mother died saving Audrey. His company went bankrupt and fell into debt. At the same time, she was offered a scholarship to study abroad. It was a world-renowned university, and medicine had always been her dream. He didn't want to hold her back, so he broke up with her. He met her again when she returned from her studies abroad. For 5 years, he had worked himself to the bone. He developed a severe stomach condition. When he went to the doctor, she happened to be his physician. He also learned that all these years, she had remained single, waiting for him. Just as Audrey changed the fortune for the 6th time, he was able to end the engagement and finally break up with her for good. He accepted Claire's proposal. What he hadn't expected was that the kind, sunny Claire was actually Diane Sterling's daughter. So they staged the whole charade. They deliberately leaked that he was marrying into the Sterling family, but never specified who. It successfully fooled Audrey. Soon, his phone rang urgently. It was Audrey's number. Her voice was filled with a barely suppressed panic. "Gavin Vance, who exactly are you marrying?" He held the phone, his voice calm. "Who I marry is none of your business." With that, he hung up. Her voice was cut off completely. The day before the wedding, he was in the bedroom trying on his suit. Suddenly, a commotion erupted downstairs. A moment later, a frantic knock came at the door. "Sir, Miss Prescott." She forced her way in. He adjusted his bow tie, took a deep breath, and went downstairs. In the living room, Audrey stood in the center. Her dress was wrinkled, her hair slightly disheveled. It looked like she had rushed over. The moment she saw him, her eyes lit up. Then, they were overwhelmed by a potent mix of resentment and panic. She strode toward him but was stopped by the bodyguards. She struggled, her eyes locked on him. Her voice trembled almost imperceptibly. "You're marrying Claire Sterling? You've known each other all along, haven't you? You've been lying to me from the start." He walked up to her and looked at her quietly. He once thought she might be the light that saved him from his despair. He had been ready to be her husband. Only later did he realize she just saw him as a clinging vine, dependent on her. Now that he had found his own roots, he would not be going back. "I just didn't tell you that the person I'm marrying is Claire. As for us knowing each other, that's part of our past, and it has nothing to do with you." Audrey's expression turned frantic. Her eyes were red as she demanded, "Gavin Vance, we have an engagement. Have you forgotten that when your mom died, I was the one who supported you? When the Vance company went bankrupt, I was the one who took you into my home and gave you the resources to establish yourself at my company. Now that you're successful, you're just going to kick me to the curb and marry someone else? What is your heart made of?" He couldn't believe she still didn't see her own mistakes. His voice turned cold. "You're the one who kept changing the fortunes for Tim's sake, who never took our engagement seriously. As for you helping me, it was only because you felt you owed my mom a life debt. And the resources at your company? I've more than paid that back with all the deals I closed. Audrey, even now, you don't realize that the person you truly love is Tim. Otherwise, you wouldn't have made me give in to him time and time again." "I don't," Audrey argued. "Tim is really just my brother. Gavin, let's not call off the engagement, okay? You want to go back to Vance Industries and be a CEO? I support you. We can even have our companies collaborate just like before. The wedding you want, I'll have it arranged immediately. Please don't marry Claire Sterling, okay?" He shook his head. "I used to think you were a good person. Now I know you're just toxic. We were never meant to be. Audrey, I'm getting married tomorrow. Please leave. Don't make a scene." He finally got to say those words back to her. The sound of steady footsteps came from the doorway. Claire walked into the living room, wearing an elegant suit. She was holding a small jewelry box. She walked naturally to his side, protectively positioning herself slightly in front of him. Her gaze was calm as she looked at Audrey. "Ms. Prescott, tomorrow is my wedding to Gavin. You are not welcome here today. Please leave." Audrey stared at the hand Claire had placed on his shoulder. The jealousy in her eyes was about to spill over. She opened her mouth to say something, but under Claire's icy glare, no words came out. In the end, she could only stare at him, her eyes filled with resentment and regret. But she was helpless. "Gavin Vance, I won't give up on you." She left him with those words and stumbled out of the house. The living room was finally quiet again. Claire turned around and gently smoothed the frown on his forehead. She opened the jewelry box. Inside was a pair of simple, elegant platinum cufflinks. "Don't let irrelevant people ruin your mood." She gently took out the cufflinks and fastened them on his cuffs. "Tomorrow you're going to be the happiest groom in the world." He touched the platinum at his wrist. No one would be taking this from him. He turned to look at Claire. His eyes were filled with a smile. Yes, the past was the past. Tomorrow was his new beginning. The next day, the wedding ceremony was proceeding smoothly. Suddenly, Audrey burst in, trying to disrupt everything. Just as the scene was about to spiral out of control, he calmly took out his phone and dialed Tim's number. A moment later, Audrey's phone vibrated. A video popped up on her screen. In it, Tim was standing on a balcony railing. The wind whipped his shirt around him, his eyes filled with a desperate, manipulative threat. "Sis, if you don't come get me right now, I'm gonna jump." Audrey stood frozen, her knuckles white from clenching her fists. Her breath caught in her throat, a fierce internal battle raging within her. She looked at him, her eyes pleading and hesitant. But in the end, that hesitation lost to her concern for Tim. She spun around and practically stumbled out of the church. He watched her hurried departure. He felt a deep sense of relief. No matter how long he waited or how many times he gave in her heart, Tim would always be the one she would drop everything for. Thankfully, he had long since abandoned all expectations. This wedding was his farewell to the past. From the moment she turned her back, he would never give her another chance to come back. The wedding ceremony was completed as planned, with Claire as his bride. After the wedding, they left for a vacation on a tropical island. The sun, the sand, and the company of the one he loved completely washed away the shadows of the past. But before he left, he sent the Prescott family a generous gift. The real Prescott heir, David, who had been abducted many years ago, he had finally found him. The news of David's return to the Prescott family was plastered all over the internet by the media and reporters. Audrey's parents, who were in Europe, rushed home immediately upon hearing the news. When they were reunited with their biological son, they also learned that his engagement to Audrey had been called off. And the catalyst was the imposter, Tim. Mrs. Prescott's face instantly darkened, especially when David tearfully revealed the truth of what happened back then. He had been deliberately kidnapped by Tim's father and abandoned in the countryside to suffer. Meanwhile, his father had sent his own son to the Prescott family to take his place. Mrs. Prescott trembled with rage. She grabbed the pale-faced Tim, who was standing nearby, and slapped him hard across the face. She roared, "You usurper! We've been harboring a snake in our own home. Get out of this house right now, and don't you ever show your face here again." Tim clutched his cheek, tears streaming down his face, and turned to Audrey for help. But at that moment, Audrey was looking at David. She was the one who had taken her brother out to play that day. That was when he was abducted by Tim's father. Thinking of all the years she had defended Tim out of guilt, and how she had hurt Gavin because of it, her heart filled with remorse and regret. She was in no mood to plead for Tim. She just turned her face away. "You should go. Don't stay here any longer." But Tim just laughed. He told them a secret. He said he could give the Prescott family an heir. Later, his friend Mark told him what happened. That day, Tim confessed that doctors had long ago diagnosed Audrey as being unable to have children. He used this as a bargaining chip, claiming that he and his ex-girlfriend, Stacy, had a son named Alex who could be adopted by Audrey as the Prescott family heir. For the sake of continuing the family line, Audrey and her parents eventually compromised, setting him up in one of their properties. But it wasn't long before Stacy showed up and exposed everything. It turned out Tim had been lying to her all along. The child wasn't his. He had promised Stacy a large sum of money to play along but never paid her a dime. When Audrey learned of this double deception, she was furious. Mark said she nearly strangled Tim on the spot. Seeing his scheme had unraveled, Tim took what money he could and fled. As for the child, the Prescotts sent him to an orphanage. The next time Audrey saw him, he was on stage at a new product launch. His wife, Claire, stood beside him, her belly already showing. She was 6 months pregnant. Audrey could only watch him from a distance. She didn't dare get closer. She certainly didn't dare to disturb him. She had regretted it more than once. If only she hadn't changed the fortunes time and time again. Would he be her husband now? Would their child be on the way? But there were no if-onlys and no second chances in life. After the press conference in the lounge, Claire gently linked her arm with his, resting her head on his shoulder. She asked softly, "How are you feeling? Are you okay?" She shook her head. She was a doctor and had never wanted to take over the Sterling family business. If it weren't for his need for revenge, for his need to save Vance Industries, she would never have agreed to return to the Sterling family. Besides, Diane Sterling had cancer and didn't have much time left. Her condition for cooperating with him had been that Claire would return to the family. After they married, the kind-hearted Claire continued to work as a doctor, saving lives. She'd said her mother had made many mistakes in her life. By doing good as a doctor, she hoped to atone for her mother's debts. As for the Sterling Group, she didn't know anything about business. He was currently in the process of taking it over. It would all be his in the future. When their child grew up, he would pass it on. And both mother and daughter had agreed that their second child would take the Vance name. That way, both families would have an heir. His grandmother was so happy that her health improved significantly, and she was even able to leave the nursing home. He received another call from Audrey. It was a year later. He was in the nursery with his child. He assumed she was calling to stir up trouble again. But it was the butler on the line. "Mr. Vance, could you please come to the hospital?" Turned out Audrey had cancer. Ever since he got married, her lifestyle had become erratic. She smoked, drank, and stayed up all night, burning through her health. By the time it was discovered, it was already terminal. Audrey refused to fight it. The cancer spread too quickly. In just 5 months, she was rail thin and couldn't even get out of bed. The doctor had issued a critical condition notice that day. Her dying wish was to see him one last time, which was why the butler had dared to call him. He was silent for a moment. Then he agreed. At her bedside, the once tall, beautiful woman was now just skin and bones, completely unrecognizable. Her frail body didn't even have the strength to lift a hand. She could only gaze at him with a devoted look. "Devin, I'm so sorry. If there's a next life, I will cherish you." A next life? He was a firm materialist. But if there really was a next life, he hoped they would never meet. That way, neither of them could hurt the other. Still, he accepted her apology, to let her pass on in peace. After the funeral, David joined the company. Mr. Prescott also returned to the office and began teaching him the ropes. He would be the future heir of the Prescott family. On his birthday, he leaned against Claire, looking out at the deep blue sea. He sighed contentedly. "It's good. All the wrongs have finally been set right." Claire chuckled softly and kissed his cheek. The sunlight fell on her face, tracing a gentle silhouette. She was the woman who truly cherished him. He had nothing more to ask for. He only wished for peaceful days and a safe, healthy family.